You're invited to a complimentary web consult to see if you can get help, a solution that addresses the underlying cause without taking drugs with serious side effects, and an 87 to 93% success rate helping neuropathy sufferers get their lives back. Reserve your spot now. Call 312-988-9655 or go to chicagonervepain.com to sign up. This is a complimentary consultation, but space is limited. Call 312-988-9655 or go to chicagonervepain.com.
Looking to hire? Indeed will help you speed up the process. They have 135 skills tests to help you find the right candidates faster. Visit Indeed.com/credit.
7:37, Team Hochberg Traffic Center time and Jim.
Sheridan Road remains closed in North Waukegan between Miraflores and Blanchard due to an earlier crash. Grand Avenue is shut down in River Grove between Elm and Spruce due to a collision. Then there's westbound 8094, really gummed up from Grant to Klein. The left lane is blocked for the crash. And there's ongoing road work. It's 28 minutes from the toll road to the Bishop Ford Freeway, eastbound 14. Inbound, Kennedy, delays start at Cumberland, 30 minutes O'Hare to downtown, quicker in the express. About 21 minutes to the airport. Eisenhower, 32 minutes, 390 to downtown. Stevenson, it's 28 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive. Ryan, 18 minutes, 95th to downtown. Northbound Lakeshore Drive is congested approaching Roosevelt. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. AM 560 Weather Center. Your forecast, clouds and sun this morning. We'll have a shower in spots this afternoon, high 58. Currently 46. Next news at 8. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560 The Answer.
Good morning, Dan, and in for Amy J this morning, Chicago Tribune columnist John Cass. Yes,
Good
the
morning,
John
everyone.
Cass. Yes.
Good morning, everyone.
Hey, John, you know, a lot of people, I think for a lot of people, public disfavor, like being ridiculed in public, this is why people have such a fear of public speaking, that is a fate worse than death, right? We know surveys that find that people would rather be physically injured than publicly ridiculed.
Which is why it's a weapon of the left and successful one.
But maybe not so. Maybe public disfavor is not a fate worse than death. Maybe you don't have to go out like Socrates, imbibing the hemlock because you questioned the orthodoxy of your betters. Maybe there is something to be had in exile, even if you are victimized by the Jacobins. I'm thinking philosophically because of this piece by Caylan Ford that we discussed earlier in the week, which if you haven't read, you should read. You should also share. There's a piece at AmericanMind.org. They can't cancel your soul. And we're pleased to have Caylan Ford join us now. She is a documentary filmmaker in Canada. Caylan, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So before we wax philosophical further, tell us what happened to you. We recounted it a couple of days ago as per your piece, but the first-person account I think would be helpful.
Sure. So I was in 2018-2019, I was running to be a member of the provincial legislature in Alberta, Canada. So this, for Americans, we don't have a bicameral system at the provincial level. So this would be the equivalent of a seat in the state House and or Senate. And I was quite a prominent candidate. I was sort of considered the face of my party and, you know, was representative of a new generation of conservative leadership and was very heavily, prominently profiled in the national and local media. And then a month before the election, a website that was sort of affiliated with my political opponents published an unbylined article citing an anonymous accuser saying that in a private conversation years before, I had echoed white nationalist rhetoric was their accusation. Now, in truth, I hadn't. I was actually discussing ways to reduce the risk of sort of far-right radicalization. But in my accuser's telling, I was expressing sympathy for white supremacist terrorists. And this was 3 days after the Christchurch Mosque massacre, when 50 innocent people were killed at prayer.
In New Zealand. Right?
Yes, that's right. And before I could even respond to this, my political opponents put a press release demanding I be removed from the ballot, implying that I was morally unfit to stand for office. And a media storm and a social media storm immediately ensued without any attempt to actually understand what had actually occurred and what the context was. And within 4 hours, my candidacy was terminated.
Wait a second. No, I thought so. So this attack comes, and then wouldn't it be then your political allies? You said run it face of the Conservative Party there locally. Your conservative allies, people that you knew from the academy, people that you know as a filmmaker, they all rally to your defense then, right?
Well, no. This is sort of one of the important things to understand about what's termed cancel culture is that it's not just a matter of being sort of mobbed online or shamed and accused in the press. The actual cancellation, so to speak, can only be effected through an act of institutional capitulation, right? It's when your institution, when your allies decide that it's too much of a risk to try to defend you. And no institution is more reactive or more anxious than a political party on the eve of an election. And so I was just put in a position where I had to resign and step down. The challenge for me was that I did not have records of the conversations that they were quoting. And so I couldn't actually present to the public what had actually been said and what the real context was. I couldn't show how they had edited my comments deceptively. So I had no real defense. And an election cycle is...
Well, you couldn't show. I mean, I would think the press would be wanting to hear from you so they could pillory you some more. And so couldn't you get up in front of the press corps and say, I know the conversation that you're referring to, and this is the context of it. This is my actual view. This is what I actually said at the time, which was my view then and is my view now.
So I eventually did. I went on a local radio show and presented my side of the story and sort of disclosed what the full background was. And my political opponents coordinated a petition drive to drive that radio host off the air for having the temerity to interview me and allow me to defend myself.
The reign of terror.
Sorry, what was that?
The reign of terror. We're seeing it again.
That's right. Yeah. So when you're falsely accused in this context, I mean, there's nothing resembling due process, right? There's no rules of evidence. There's no presumption of innocence, and there's not even really a right to a defense. You are accused, and so you are guilty, and that was what happened. So after that, a lot of journalists and editors in Canada said, "Look, we know that this narrative about you is false, but frankly, I don't want to be exposed to the same thing this radio host was exposed to. She faced enormous pressure. She almost lost her job." And people just didn't want to put up with that.
So you're just eliminated then. You're just vaporized in terms of any sort of public footprint.
That's what it felt like, right? And one of the really quite frustrating things about these processes, and I've heard this from so many other people who've been through analogous experiences, is that privately, people will say the nicest things in the world about you. They'll say that they know that this is an injustice.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Right.
And
nothing like private courage. Yes.
That's right. That is really one of the very frustrating things, is that the more social capital people have, the more afraid they are to lose it. And so particularly people in positions of influence become very afraid of saying what they believe to be true if they fear that it is unpopular. So there's a huge amount of preference falsification that sustains these phenomena.
Those of us who've gone through some of what you have gone through and survived it, like I have, will never forget. I mean, Dan, for one, Professor Charles Lipson, for another. You'd never forget Tom Bevan from Real Clear Politics. You never forget the people that stood up for you when your head is being demanded. And I thought your piece, They Can't Cancel Your Soul, I make it required reading for everybody who can hear my voice. And may I just ask you about one part of it?
Yes, of course.
I'm just quoting here, and forgive me, but I do have the voice of a nightingale. I know it. As a public person, Caylan Ford writes, I felt I had been vaporized and condemned to live as a kind of ghost, conscious, seeing everything, yet no longer part of the world. Lurking beneath Hugo's motto is Ovid's description of exile as a living death, and I can do no better. So, my friend Ghost, are you still a ghost up in Canada?
It very much feels like that. But this I write in the piece is, in a sense, I think that's what affords a person a measure of lucidity and at least an opportunity at moral clarity. Because ultimately, the things that were taken from me, my name and career and reputation and position, and sort of being able to feel that I enjoy the esteem of my peers or whatever else, all of these things ultimately are transient and they exist outside of ourselves, and so can be given and taken from us by forces outside of ourselves. And this is something that is true of all of us at all times, only it's easily forgotten. We start to think that these things are stable and permanent, and we're aggrieved when we lose them suddenly. But we all ultimately lose all of these things when we die and we depart this world, right? And so that in that sense, I think there is a sort of gift in being made to lose them somewhat more prematurely and still having time left to us in this life to focus on the permanent things, the things that can't be given or taken away.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned in your piece that you're a mom of two, and I wonder how much of what you're enduring and the way that you've chose to tackle it is because of the example that you want to provide your children.
Well, they're my kids are both very young. So my daughter, my younger one is only 2 years old, and my older is 5. And but the courage of my older daughter through this was an example to me. Yeah, certainly, and I think that it's important when you go through significant experiences of loss or suffering, as we all do at some point in our lives. It's important to find a way to redeem that. And it seems to me that the only available course of redeeming suffering available to me is to try, though I often fail, but at least to try to bear it with nobly and to find some good in it. I think that's,
your 5-year-old daughter, she had an appreciation for what was happening to you?
A little bit. She understood because I was campaigning for a year, and this was our routine for 9 months, ever since basically after I was cleared to walk after my second daughter was born. I was on the campaign trail, and so virtually every night I would go out campaigning, and that was a huge sacrifice for our family, and something that my daughter had learned to bear very stoically. And after I had to resign, she'd tell me that I need to go campaigning again, and that this time she would help me. So she was very courageous in the face of that, and something I appreciated a great deal.
With a little removal from this, and particularly maybe in wake of this piece that is getting noticed, has there been any boomerang effect to your benefit? People now saying, if you've got a documentary film idea, I'm interested in helping to underwrite it or raise money for it. I'm interested in helping you get your career back. I'm interested in helping you in some material way because what happened to you was wrong. Are people perhaps shamed enough for what they didn't do in the moment that they're doing something or trying to do something for you now?
I think it's a little bit early to say, but I was very fortunate in that among other things, I've previously made documentary films, particularly about human rights abuses in China. And I was very fortunate that some of the people the contacts that I made in that context were willing to, still believed in me and were willing to support me in making another documentary film. And so I'm currently working on a documentary that is sort of about this thing we call cancel culture. And interesting, you talked about Plato at the very outset. I often say that
Socrates,
it's actually a sort
yeah.
well, it's Plato's Socrates, but you're
yes,
referring
that's
to,
true.
right?
That's true. Yes, yes, that's true. I should have known better than to try to trade wits with you, but per this piece where everyone from Seneca to Dante to Victor Hugo is mentioned. But
everybody
anyway,
has to read this.
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Caylan.
But I say that the documentary is actually it's a revalidation of the arguments made in Plato's Gorgias dialogue, and the Gorgias basically ends. Socrates is trying to convince his interlocutor that we should not be afraid of death, that there is really nothing dishonorable in being falsely accused and wrongly put to death or sent into exile or tortured or deprived of your civil liberties. That's not what's dishonorable. What's dishonorable is doing wrong to others. And Socrates says at the very end of that dialogue, he says, we have to take greater care to avoid doing wrong than we do to avoid suffering wrong. And above all else, we must concentrate not on making people believe that we're good, but on being good in our private lives as well as in public. And if someone does prove to be bad, however, punishment is essential. And the next best thing to actually being a moral person is becoming one. That is, learning restraint by paying the penalty for one's wrongdoing. And so I think if you internalize and believe what Socrates is saying there's really nothing to be afraid of from the vantage point of the soul in our current political climate, as long as you try your best to cleave to virtue and to doing what is good and to saying what is true, then you have nothing really to fear.
She is Caylan Ford. She's a documentary filmmaker up in Canada, as we were discussing. I tweeted out her piece again. I'll do it as many times as I need to. They Can't Cancel Your Soul at AmericanMind.org. Caylan, a beautifully written piece and wonderfully grounded perspective. Appreciate your time. Stay in touch, and good luck to you with your forthcoming documentary and your pursuits more generally.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on this morning.
And she joined us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Small investors shamed Wall Street by running the price of certain stocks up to the detriment of the big hedge funds. Social media and trading platforms then kept investors from buying that stock. A financial war and a fight for control is being waged against Americans. With all of this volatility, it's never been more important to protect your